everybody in the evaluation. You've mentioned in one of the reading, I think from yesterday, that we need to be fair in the evaluation, that we have to include everybody and to include all the abilities in the evaluation. And that would help maybe shift some of the culture of the student, because we teaching. I don't know if you guys can hear me.
Oh, very well. The
Yeah,
connection is perfect.
I just changed the spot in the room. That's all. So yeah, so I was saying that with different kind of evaluation, we can capture the variety or the different ability of the student and include everybody in the process of evaluation. But most importantly, that this Amal said it yesterday. She said most importantly that we need to include the student in this kind of evaluation and discuss it with them and tell them the purpose of it, so they don't always assume that this is going to affect my grade in the course, but it's going to affect my learning rather than my grade. So that's my experience, and I like the reflection that you provide, Reina, earlier at the beginning of the course. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have want to share their thoughts?
Yeah, maybe I should give you some thoughts on this. So it's definitely very important to do a need assessment and need analysis. And probably one of the dimensions of what you described is involving the learners in making those decisions about the taught content, the content that you're going to teach, and probably in turn including their voices in how the assessment is going to be. Definitely, that is a desirable thing, because a lot of what we do, and we said basically this is in terms of validity, and sometimes we just bring in things. For example, I'll just give you something similar, my own experience of teaching medical terminology to my students. So at my university, we started teaching the medical students back in 2021. And since then, one of the things that has always been there is how you're going to assess medical terminology. And the course content that is provided to us, there are definitely those limitations. I mean, so it's a dictionary sort of content. You have the dictionary meanings of individual items, that's the medical terms, and a short definition with an example. Now, our problem started because I was one of the first few people who actually worked with the content, because I also had an experience of teaching medical terminology previously. So the problem we had was, at some point when the assessments came out from our testing and evaluation team, it was more of the assessment of students' medical knowledge than familiarizing them with the meaning and use of medical terms. Now, that was actually a huge question on the validity of the test itself. So again, now following your formula, one way could be, let's learn from it, because you're touching upon, again, a very important area, what we call the backwash effect or washback effect of assessment. And that is basically, probably that's exactly what you're saying, that the impact of tests on your teaching, right? Now taking this is in a sense analyzing the test data to have an informed teaching in the classroom, right? And that's very much a desirable thing. And I mean, in our context, I mean, we have been trying for it, but somehow, let's say a term called, let's say there is arthritis. Arthritis is the inflammation of joints, right? Now, the max that an English language teaching professional can tell the students is, so there is something called joints and there is something called inflammation. And what happens in the inflammation? All right, so there is a bit of redness, swelling, and all that. These are the things we can say. But beyond this, we cannot go into the scientific basis of it. And when the tests include that thing, that becomes a huge question mark on it. So the response, something probably relevant to what you're planning to do, that we came back and we started looking for more relevant content. We started looking for medical terminology books, not specifically written for medical professionals, or maybe if they're written for English language teachers or any other general educators, there should be some relevance to us. And then again, it not only impacted the changing that content, so we made relevant changes and when necessary, but the main thing was there was an impact on the subsequent tests we created. It's not only the classroom practice. So, and one more thing that something probably relevant to your thing was the test approach to teaching. So you start with the test, and probably that's what you said. I was listening to your narration there. So you start with the test, and then you want to teach, and you want to test it again. So it's very much in practice, and probably the test approach is a good thing. But again, basically, in doing all this thing, we are coming back to curriculum development. We are coming back to pedagogy, the classroom teaching, and all that. So that's what I was noting when you described the situation there.
Thank you. Anyone else want to give feedback on maybe some of the things they may do differently if they backwards design a course that they have taught in the past? No? All right, since we're on the topic of backwards
I want to
design.
comment actually on Ahmed's talk when he was saying that the curriculum design in part of that and how the test, it's always been a dilemma in curriculum design or even in testing as well, whether the test should drive the curriculum design or the curriculum design should be the first to drive the test. And it's still a dilemma that everybody has their own point of view on that. But to me is that we need to understand what we want the learner to be able to do. That's the first thing. And based on that, we start designing our own evaluation based on what we want people to be able to perform or to do at the end of each course. So I believe that this maybe is a fair point, especially in preparatory programs like the one we teach at, that we need to be able to understand the end goal of each course that we teach and operate within that framework to help learning. Yesterday you've made the distinction between the three type of test for learning, test as learning, and test and the third one. And I believe that, again, I say that although there could be institutional constructions or constraint to what we are able to do in terms of the final test, but in between, I think sky is not the limit. We can, but as long as we include the student, because we're working with shifting cultures of the student, and also we're trying to navigate our way through the institutional assessment that are in place anyway. So that's my comment. Thank you.
So I was trying to avoid the teach the test. I was trying to avoid that, but I think we have to say something to it. And I will comment this way. I believe that you don't teach to teach the test. However, that's different than using as you mentioned yesterday, Doc, using the summative assessment as a formative assessment. I think they're two different things, because as you mentioned, and as we mentioned yesterday, if you understand the course outcomes and what we want students to take away, what are the expected outcomes from the student outcomes? If we understand that well, then we need to front load that assessment to make sure that we ourselves are covering the key points so the students get the gist and the main idea of the course. Now, if you are teaching the test, if you're actually saying this is going to be, the first section is going to be this, fill in the blank, and these are going to be the questions, then obviously that's something different. But using the assessment, as you mentioned again yesterday, using a summative assessment as a formative assessment to get proper, to build really the learner profile, I think that's essential. And I don't think that's teaching the test. And I think a lot of people would automatically say, if I said, in some circles, if I said front load the assessment, people would jump on me and say, oh, you want to teach the test. No, they're two different things. So that's teaching the test, actually, and there's some teachers who actually say, these are the items that are going to be on the test, and we're going to cover them. That's different than saying, than using the summative assessment as a way to gain data to build a learner profile, so you can ask the right formative questions to drive the learning. I think that's two different things. Anyone else want to share anything about that? Want it? All right, let's go back into backwards design, where we left off yesterday. And I'm pretty sure everyone knows what backwards design. We talked about it a little bit yesterday, and it's really starting, making sure that we, number one, know what the course outcomes are. All right, we know what the expected outcomes. I think by the end of the course, what should the student be able to do? How will their character change? How will their worldview change? It depends on what type of course you're teaching and what the outcomes of the course are. If you don't start there, you don't have a backwards design. It's the same thing I mentioned about the supermarket. What's the goal of that supermarket? Right? Is it profitability? What is the goal of that overall supermarket? And then from there, you can backwards design that. You can backwards design that supermarket, the layout of that supermarket, to do what? Get customers to grab as many items as possible, regardless of what their initial intentions were, right? So their initial intentions were just to go and get a gallon of milk. We want the design will help them grab milk, bread, a pack of chicken, some soda, right? Do more than what they initially desired. And I think that's what we intend to do when we present a course to learners. And then after we understand those desired outcomes, or those expected outcomes, we have to think about what is the evidence. What's the evidence that the students? What's the evidence that we can observe? The observable evidence to show that the students are more than likely going to meet those outcomes or demonstrate those outcomes by the end of the course, or by the end of a summative assessment. And then we plan the experience out, right? We decide what approach or what methods we will use to engage learners, hopefully many different methods. And then those methods and then those methods, we will teacher notice, which will drive the formative assessments, which will drive the instruction, and that's a loop that continues to happen. And then we assess again in a summative assessment, and that's pretty much backwards design. Anyone want to add anything to that? So let's look at an example here from a K-12 perspective. We have this desired outcome, where we understand what the desired outcome. We figure out what the evidence, what the students will be able to do at certain points, whether it's benchmarks, whether it's summative assessments, and that will drive the formative assessments. And then we put the students through a series of learning experiences. Okay. So assessment becomes really the driving force of the instruction. And I mentioned this yesterday. I think a lot of educators don't see it that way. We see assessments as something that we do, to gain scores to put in the grade book, and to create a progress report for students, and to tell them you need to do better. Well, assessment, I would argue that assessments drives the instruction. That if we don't use assessment for driving an instruction, then we're not really serving the needs of our students well, and we're more than likely not going to meet that desired outcome. So I think that's the power of backwards design, is that in order to properly backwards design, assessment has to be the key focus, and mainly formative assessment has to be a key vehicle to help you readjust your teaching, all right, to figure out what is going to be the best method. Without the assessment, how do you differentiate? How do you personalize? When do you know when it's the appropriate time to utilize cooperative learning techniques? And I think that's all through assessment. I think the best evidence for this for me is adaptive testing. I used to sell a product called iReady, which is an adaptive test. Is everyone familiar with how adaptive tests work? Adaptive assessments, how they work, right? So I would like to believe, as a technologist, that we're going to rely heavily on adaptive assessments in the future, because I think even though the technology is not new, we're not using an asset, which is very inexpensive nowadays, in adaptive testing, because adaptive testing can take a lot of the mystery out of what we do, and it can create equity for students. But for the purpose of backwards design, the adaptive test is always assessing the students, right? At every level, they even assess how long it takes a student to go from question 2 to question 3, and it makes a judgment about the next couple of questions. And you can't get more equitable than that. So I think adaptive testing is evidence of the power of assessment, because what that program is doing from the moment the student logs in, or test taker logs in, it is monitoring every aspect of how the student takes that test, not just whether they got the answer right or wrong. And we get a lot of important data from adaptive tests. All right. Backwards design, here's a post-secondary example for us university folks. It's the same structure, same logic as K to 12. The program outcome is specific. We apply the nursing process to a complex clinical scenario, not knowing the nursing process, but applying it. That's kind of what you were mentioning earlier, but your example, Mr. Ahmed. That tells us that the assessment has to require application, not just recall. A multiple choice exam testing definitions of each nursing process step would fail this alignment test. For post-secondary faculty, this is the logic behind course level and program learning outcome assessments. Your assessments needs to provide the evidence that students achieve the outcome. The outcome needs to be specific enough that the assessment can actually provide that evidence. And I think backwards design helps us do that. It's the driving force. Because when you backwards design, you're less likely to say by the end of the course or by the end of the learning day, oh, I missed this. I should have done it this way. Backwards design helps us continuously reassess ourselves, reevaluate ourselves as teaching. So in essence, the assessment actually becomes a ongoing professional development vehicle for teachers, for educators. Stop sharing. Lost my screen. Give me 1 second. All right, let's go. All right. Why am I losing my screen? Hold on a second. Give me 1 second. All right, alignment in Bloom's taxonomy. So we mentioned Bloom's yesterday, and I know everyone here is probably extremely familiar with Bloom's. But the one question that I do want to present here is, what value? Let me ask a little bit more pointed question. Do you believe that evaluation is a higher order thinking skill than synthesis, or did the revised version of Bloom's get it right as far as swapping evaluation with creation, with synthesis? Because I'm under the belief that the original Bloom's, from the perspective of the hierarchy, was correct, and that the revised version, as far as creation being a higher ordered skill, is incorrect. Now, the revision is helpful in that for writing smart objectives, and that the actions are easier for teachers to understand because they're in verb form. But I think for me, as an instructional designer, I think there's a major flaw in having synthesis or ranking synthesis as a higher order skill than evaluation. Any thoughts on that? And has anyone ever thought about that?
Yeah, I mean, good morning, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, I kind of tend to agree with you, especially in the coming from an instructional design standpoint, because whatever model you use, either whether you're going to use rapid instructional design or traditional adding model of instructional design, or even applying the assessment that we're talking about today, summative or formative, there always has to be evaluative assessment that is going on in an iterative process that always checks, see if everything is on track, if the outcomes are being met. And even within Bloom's, I would think that synthesis or creativeness is a higher order thinking skill, but it has to be evaluated. So I think that if we're going to follow that hierarchy, that evaluation has to kind of be the iterative process. It is the checks and balances in every step of the hierarchy. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that. I mean, yeah, in order to it is a higher order thinking ability, because it it deals with the metacognition of the hierarchy, and yeah, so I kind of tend to like the traditional Blooms, but with this evaluation at the top.
And I think when you put evaluation at the top, it continues the loop, right? As you mentioned, now you can loop the learning, and the learning doesn't stop. However, I've seen some recent ideas about flipping Blooms. Have you seen this idea about flipping Blooms? Actually starting with creation first. Has anyone heard about this? Start with creation first, because children naturally like to deconstruct things. So they will build something just to deconstruct it. The point of the Bloom's conversation is not really to kind of worship Bloom's, or kind of say that Bloom's is the end all be all. But Bloom's helps us out with alignment when it comes to assessment. And again, it goes back to whatever those course outcomes. What are the expected outcomes? If we say in the course book that we want students to analyze, whatever we want them to analyze, why do we have multiple choice questions? Why is 75% of the assessment or 100% of the assessment MCQs? You can't analyze with MCQs. So we have to think about that. Again, if we don't really understand what the course outcomes and what the expected outcomes are, we can't properly align the assessment. So that's the key. Bloom's allows us to say, okay, this is the language that we're using. This is the outcome. Now I need to build an assessment that is aligned and represents and demonstrates what the student's actually able to do, and not just fall back on fashion statements such as MCQs. Any issue with that? Any comments about that? All right.
Ray, I guess I'm just thinking here loudly. Sometimes even like for the sake of not convenient, rather than the sake of being efficient with large number of students and the restriction of times, you could use multiple choices to do many things, but it depends also on the way you frame and give the different scenarios of the multiple choices, because I've seen it in not even in language exam, but I've seen it in other exams when I was teaching the Master of Medical Education, we use different scenarios to address the analytical part. So you give the learners, you subject them to a case, and then you give them different answers that that aim to discuss or to understand how they would analyze these particular things without getting them to analyze it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. But in those scenarios, aren't we? It becomes very difficult to design those items, right? Because
Yeah.
now we're running into validity issue. Like, I'm not saying you can't do that with an MCQ. What I'm
Yeah.
saying is that's like
It's
it's advanced, right? It's an
it,
advanced assessment writing.
yeah,
It's extremely advanced. Um,
and there
and
where it comes.
there might be more efficient ways to do it outside of MCQs,
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely. But always we look at the point of time, because
Yeah.
mostly like exams are running in a specific period of time in which you need the result by that. So that's why I said at the beginning we need to negotiate the institutional aspect and our exam or testing for learnings. So that's where the so basically in summative exams there could be lots of MCQs and stuff because of the time constraint there. But within the course itself, when we have about 14 weeks to teach and evaluate our teaching through the 14 weeks, then during that time, maybe we are able to provide constructive exams that helps improve learning without ignoring what the student are expected to do in their summative exams.
Or the other way, we could totally rethink how we administer, how we proctor the exams. The exams don't have to be in lecture halls. They don't have to be in these very restricted spaces. We can
Absolutely.
totally rethink. We can totally rethink how we do it. Um, and, and again, that's a lot of work too, by the way, right? That's a lot of work too. But what's the biggest payoff, and how, and what gives the most equity? What allows us to identify whether the student actually knows it or not, or whether they meet the expectations of the course, their outcomes. So it's um, interesting because some people hold true that exam has to be in that lecture hall. You got to have invigilators, and we got to make sure they're not cheating. And um, and like as you said, it's more productive to give them 50 MCQs, time it, run it through the machine, and then assess it. But it's productive, but is it, how much of the equity is there?
Exactly. I always goes because I've been in both parts, institutional and in structure, so I can hold both hats. And I always believe that the answer is in negotiating what is best for the student. So some parts what I see, there are parts that as an instructors I have no say over. I can make suggestion, but I know that it might take time to sink somewhere else. But it's better that I focus on the part that I know I can do to help my learner. And that's the part that I should focus on. Nevertheless, I'm not saying that we cannot make suggestion for improvement. We can always suggest that in the course evaluation form, in whatever it is. We keep going back to that, but we do things that within our capacity as well. So I don't want to eliminate our agencies as instructors. We have lots of agencies that we can exercise within our classroom, within the space that we are allocated to, and hoping that at some point, when one, two, three, four, five instructors starting to use a particular method of evaluation, and that is more helpful to the student, the structure will listen. the institution will listen, the management will listen. But until we have enough proof, nobody would listen to whatever we're going to say. That's my point.
Yeah, it's actually very complex. It's a very complex issue. Dr. Musa?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, so basically the way that we perform assessments, we're basically stuck in the lower level of memorization, because it's not really demonstrating. I don't believe that MCQs demonstrate application. What they demonstrate is the ability of the learner to recall green information. And in this recall of green information, they're not demonstrating understanding. What they are demonstrating is that they're not demonstrating competency, but what they're demonstrating is that they remember that discrete piece of information and where to put it or where to choose. And we actually, I actually teach my students as taking technique, right? Casey didn't, uh, he didn't get to study as well. Since it's an MCQ, and we all know that there are a plethora of test taking techniques that will allow on an MCQ assessment to be able to pass that examination, not with a very high grade if they didn't remember the information, but through the test taking techniques, a student will be able to pass an examination with at least a C if they understand how to take the test, if they understand what the descriptors are, and that they understand that there will always be choice, can eliminate. You have, especially if it's a 4-item MCQ, which we normally don't do, but if it's 4-item or 5-item. So I believe in my own experience that we're stuck in this because it is convenient and it does allow us to rate students, but we have to be honest that it's based on their ability to memorize information and to be able to regurgitate the information. And it has very little to do with application. As far as demonstrable, measurable skill that the student is using that is aligned with the course outcomes, especially in writing. So we use MCQs for writing a lot of times, and in my understanding of it is totally misaligned. In order for us to be aligned, we have to test the writing skill, their ability to write. So what we do, and being forthcoming about our institution, we do give them a final writing exam where they're writing, but we also give them an MCQ writing exam, which to me is more aligned with reading or even vocabulary, because what we do is through the MCQ exam for the writing, we have them read passages and select correct answers as far as form, as far as vocabulary, as far as grammar, grammatical structures, whereas a purely writing, a line writing exam would be, okay, here's your subject, sit down and write. And we do that. But I think we should place more emphasis on that, you know.
Am I frozen? Am I frozen? Am I frozen? Check, check, check. Check, check. Check, check. Am I frozen?
That's Musa only, I guess.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I think what Musa is talking about, or he's on this slide, he's basically saying that there's other opportunities to assess students. And and as you mentioned, Doc, you can assess higher order skills with multiple choice questions, even true false questions, but it's just much harder to do. And we're reducing opportunity, we're reducing validity if the question is not properly worded or presented. And there are way better ways to make that assessment. Portfolios, especially in a writing course, portfolio oral presentations where we give the oral presentations. But again, I would say also is not just the assessment type, it is how the assessment is proctored, or you guys use the word invigilated, right? It's also how it's invigilated, right? So it's not just the type, but we also need to make sure that we get the invigilation and the proctoring part of it correct too. Making sure we give enough time for the students to answer, that the condition and the environment doesn't doesn't increase anxiety. So it's not just, I think it's important to note that the assessment type, make sure we apply the most efficient assessment type, and moreover, that we actually proctor or invigilate that assessment correctly, because that can affect scores too. An improperly invigilated assessment will affect scores. Anyone else want to say anything about this?
So I must have been something in here. Now, I mean, I was listening to all those comments, very interesting and very much in discussion. So the, you know, basically the different forms of assessment, they're always there. And probably there's nothing wrong or right about any of them. But, you know, when it comes to using them in our respective contexts, probably there is a need for a qualitative improvement in the way we conduct those things. For example, it's very much possible to assess higher order thinking skills using multiple choice questions. And there's nothing wrong about it. But at times, again, I just pointed this thing out in our discussion yesterday, that there is a need for assessment literacy among the staff, the teachers, because, I mean, at times, a question gives away the answer without any cognitive load, in a positive way to the students. And in that way, it's not providing the necessary challenge, which becomes a point of learning for the students. So in that context, I would say any of those assessments are perfectly okay. Be it a multiple choice thing, or let's say the true and false type of questions, or whatever they are, they can very much be used in different contexts. Now, going back to one of the point, I think, you know, the main question that you raised and that actually resulted in all this discussion is Bloom's taxonomy and the order of those skills, evaluation, synthesis, which thing comes first. Probably that's where it started. So I just wanted to say a point about it. So to me, evaluation is the necessary first step of synthesis. Synthesis has to happen as the next step of your evaluation. And, you know, when it comes to assessment, let's say starting with creation, and that's very much in use, I mean, in many of those teaching methodologies and all that. But this is, again, you know, one thing we are coming back to. We are entering into a different zone in saying that it becomes more of a teaching tool. Assessment as a teaching tool is probably, it's very much a thing. It's very much a tool for learning and teaching. So in our day-to-day teaching, we do involve in some sort of assessment. At least it can be involved before you just go into deciphering the different components of it. Let's say, but again, you said it a little earlier today that we're not teaching to test. So it's basically we're not preparing them for any particular test. So you are teaching, but assessment becomes as an instrument of confirming that the change has taken place. So these are 2 points I just wanted to raise. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I'll go back to Diane Lawson theory, chaos theory. Diane Lawson Freeman out of University of Michigan. I think she's retired now, but she has this chaos theory, and she makes a great point that we often forget that that learning environment is chaotic and it's not a straight line. So assessment allows us to um, to know where we're going, just like in your car GPS. If there's an accident, a couple miles or kilometers away, your GPS will say, "Hey, look, there's an accident. You might want to, take this detour, right?" And you might want to go through the accident. You have to ultimately make that decision, what's best for you. But at least the GPS is giving you a heads up on the road conditions ahead of you. And I think that's where we often forget as educators that um, that learning environment, that classroom, whether it be online or in person, is chaotic because we have 10, 15, 20, 30 individuals who have a lot going on in their life, and so assessments allow us to make the necessary detours when we have to. um, so I think that's how we should always view assessments. Yes, Doc.
And also, I guess it's understanding, because I like what Ahmed always says, the idea of assessment literacy. The very moment people mention assessment, we always jumps to paper and pen exams or even online exams or what have you. But we, as you said, the chaotic theory, we are assessing all the time. So the moment you step into the classroom and you ask the student about what we have discussed yesterday, and you elicit answer from them, that's also evaluation, it's assessment. So assessment not necessarily has to give us data in sense of numeric data, but at least we always in that process. So when you explain something or you get the students to explain something, you always assess it. Ask the other student to assess themselves, assess their peer, you assess them. So that's a dynamic is always happening inside the classroom, but we don't, it doesn't have to be necessary in a numeric way. So yeah, that's my point to that.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's the key. The key of this discussion of this course is that assessment is not is assessment as a teaching tool is not numeric. It's not numeric. It's a tool to help us drive the instruction. In fact, well, I'll leave that. I think we should dive into something more practical. A lot of theory. So can we put up some assessments, and we're going to check for one validity. I'm going to pull it up on the screen. It's also in your Google Classroom on the module 2, activity 2, but I'm going to share it. We could just, instead, it's not enough. We don't need to break out into breakout rooms. We could just talk and do group think on identify at least one validity, reliability, or alignment issue. So give me a second to pull it. Are you with us, Amal? Mr. Amal? We haven't heard from you.
Sorry, yeah, I'm with you. But I can add more to what you guys said already.
I'll
I
just
agree.
make sure we
No, I'm
we're
following
not
you. Yeah.
make sure we're not
Every time I
dominating.
come up with something to say, one of my colleagues to say it. So I just love listening.
Just jump in and don't let us dominate the conversation now.
It's okay. It's okay. I like to learn more from you guys. But I will. I will.
No,
I'll
well,
just
we
make
do
sure.
want to listen to you too.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Well, you guys, everyone, mashallah, yani added, was adding great points to what you've mentioned already. And I was just taking notes.
No pressure. I just want to make sure that you know that your value, your ideas are valued also. All right. I think you guys see my screen now. This is the same document you have in the Google Classroom. All right. So here's some of the discussion points. What is the most significant validity, reliability, or alignment issue? Is this a validity problem, measuring the wrong thing, a reliability problem, inconsistent results, or an alignment problem, mismatch with outcomes? What one specific change would most improve this assessment? All right. So let's look at this case study. You can look at it on your own phone, or if it's better for you, I'm just popping it here. So the course is life science, topic is photosynthesis. Format is true, false, and there's 15 items. Stated unit outcome. Students will explain how plants convert light energy into chemical energy through the process of photosynthesis, identifying the inputs, outputs, and stages of the process. Select the items. Photosynthesis occurs in the chloroplast. Plants produce oxygen as a byproduct of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis and cellular respiration are the same process. The light-dependent reactions require sunlight. Plants only perform photosynthesis during daylight hours. Water is a reactant in photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide exists through the stigmata. Glucose is a product of photosynthesis. The carbon cycle is also called the light-independent reactions. 10. Plants produce carbon dioxide during photosynthesis. Chlorophyll absorbs primarily green light. ATP is used during the light-independent reactions. Photosynthesis only happens in leaves. The oxygen released during photosynthesis comes from water molecules. Plants use all of the glucose they produce immediately. All right. So again, you might want to look at it. I don't know how well you can see it through this. You might want to look at your phone or another screen on your device. All right, the discussion question. The unit outcome asks students to explain the process. Does this assessment format measure explanation? What does it measure instead? What would need to change? All right, so you want to look at it again. Hopefully you might be looking at it through your phone or tablet, or if you have split screen, so you can see the whole document.
What assessment? Where is this assessment under?
It's under module 2, day 1, module 2.
Module 2.
Spot the flaw. It's listed under spot the flaw. I'll read the stated outcome one more time. Students will explain how plants convert light energy into chemical energy through the process of photosynthesis, identifying the inputs, outputs, and stages of the process. And here are the true, false items. Just read them. And then discussion question. The unit outcome asks students to explain the process. Does this assessment format measure explanation? What does it measure instead? Does anyone want to jump in?
Yeah, I would just say, can I, by the way, if anyone else? Should I just go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I mean, one thing, without reading much, one thing you can get is it's not aligned. The alignment is the biggest problem, because what we can see up there is, you know, the stated learning outcome is students will explain, and what we see there is they're doing a true and false thing, and that's not definitely aligned to explaining. We won't call this explanation. So although they are probably individually putting a check mark on those statements, but that's not explaining. So alignment is a question mark here.
Does anyone have a problem with the number of questions?
I mean, for explanation, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of, so it's kind of disorganized, and also not only the, I mean, we have to define what group is this for? I miss.
This is
life science, right?
Eighth grade science.
8th grade. Okay, yeah, 8th grade science. So, yeah, there's a lot of questions, right, which could affect the validity as far as form, and also, are we sure that these questions, even, I mean, we've already established that that is misaligned from the explanation standpoint, but also, are these true and false questions? You know, does the photosynthesis occur in the chloroplast, right? They could be misaligned by a mistake, you know, within the questions, right? And it doesn't give the student an anchor point as far as the
one of my issues is that it doesn't allow the students to use their language to explain the photosynthesis process. That's number one. The other thing.
Sorry.
Go ahead,
Yes,
Amal.
and
Ms.
I
Amal.
think I think I would improve the assessment by including little short instructed response questions that ask students to explain the process in their own words instead of true-false questions.
In
It would be
concern,
better align the assessment with the learning outcomes, right?
also, yeah, you're absolutely right. Also, it's not organized. It's all over the place, right?
Yeah.
So it's just this is about process. There should be some structure to how these questions are asked. At least if we're going to do this, put some process to it, some organizations, some sequential organization to it.
But also the items themselves, just too many are focusing true and false. You testing the same thing over and again, over and again, over and again. I mean, like 2, 3 items, 5 max, they can give you the same thing that the 20 items are trying to give you. So what's the point of going over things over and again?
Yeah, it's really just, and isn't it really measuring recall, the ability to recall, and not really explain, right?
Yeah. Instead of
Also,
understanding and explaining. Yeah.
Wouldn't it be nice for there to be some visual aspects, or students might be able to number the processes?
So
they could be
put like diagrams, different diagrams that the student can choose as multiple choices with different variation. I mean, like, but it's just too much true and false. You like, how many of them? It's about 20, right?
15, I believe.
Yeah, 15.
Yeah, that's a lot.
But the reality,
cognitive load. Yeah.
The reality is these type of assessments are given every day in 8th grade classrooms all throughout the world, and students are not really so how many students take this test and they know the answer, but you get a 50-50 chance too, right? There's a 50-50 chance. What if one of these questions, I'm not a good at science, by the way, but what if one of these questions were ambiguous? Right?
Yeah, that's exactly the point. I mean, many of those things don't fall under the description of the how, because that's the main thing. So how plants convert light energy into chemical energy. So, and many of those statements answer the what, the basic evaluation of things, but probably they don't go to describe the process. And let's say if it is to make it a little relevant to what we do, the content and language learning methodologies. In that, what happens is our main focus is the language of process also, right? So in that case, individual statements don't do that, because the use of language, which is appropriate to be called explanation, we don't see that in individual sentences. So there will always be a need of prolonged answers and justifying answers on the part of the student. So that would what we call explanation. So again, in that case, we're going back to it's not being aligned, and probably if it is not aligned, then the rest of those elements are also questionable. It's probably not reliable. This is not a reliable way to assess the learning outcome, and that's what I'll say.
What if the exam was a brief constructed response, and the teacher says, list the process for photosynthesis? I don't know what the steps are. Let's say it's 7 steps. List the 7 steps. Would that be more valid and reliable?
So the point is, again, that will be the first step to do the explanation. Because normally what happens is we do that when let's say explanation can be done in writing also. So in a lesson in which I'm teaching writing, brainstorming is a part of the whole thing. So listing those 7 steps would come under brainstorming for the final step. So that's what I would say.
What if I'm just throwing another scenario, different scenarios?
Listing isn't explaining either.
It's not.
It's memorizing.
It's a first step. That's why let's say it's a first step to. I mean, let's say that's gathering data, right? So, and on the basis of which you will finally do the explanation.
What if there was a matching the different steps, and you can match the students, just do a matching activity, like A to 1 and B to 7 and 6 to the D. How about that? A matching activity.
Again, that shows process, but it doesn't explain. When we use the verb explain, that denotes that they will, give a longer answer and explain each step by, writing or giving examples, demonstrating that they understand the whole process and that they can explain it in their own words from A to Z. Usually with writing.
What would the best assessment for this be? Any suggestions of the best assessment for this class or this quiz? Based on the unit.
The point is, I'm just putting the 2 things together. You said, what if we ask them to match point number 1 to point number 5, or let's say, so just put them in the right order, right? So again, the point we're going back to is we are testing memory, right? So we are not testing anything. There's no creation, probably. There's no synthesis. So we are testing, do they remember the steps of the process? So that's the only thing we are doing that way. So it has to go beyond that, probably to give a holistic answer.
What if I ask them to draw the process?
It's okay as a first step, as I said.
What if I ask them to draw and then make captions under each of their illustrations?
I would let others answer right now.
I think it would be better
to draw and then make captions.
Yeah, so basically they're required to label the diagram and explain the process. I think that would be better aligned with the learning outcome than using true, false, or matching.
I think the other point, if we're gonna, and I think the reason, if I can go into Dr. Sajad's mind, he's probably thinking from an administrative standpoint, this is going to be, if I do a drawing or if I do a brief constructed response, this is going to have students knock on my door and make complaints about the teacher didn't give me the right answer. That's what I meant. So I think from an administrative standpoint, the true and false is the answer is right or is wrong, and I get less complaints from an administrative standpoint.
And also, Ray, from the teacher's point of view, like imagine like you're doing this in the final exam where the teacher needs to go on their break in just a couple of days, and they're all complaining that they didn't have time to mark the essays. So that's also another thing that we need to bear in mind.
Right. This is the human side of assessments, right? This is the chaotic part. And sometimes we as educators are just as part of the chaos. Well, actually, a lot of times we're the main actors in the chaos in this teaching and learning process. Because who wants to grade that, right? It's much easier to grade the true false. Much easier to grade the true false. Right?
And the other thing is, you see, we have seen this in our classrooms that students, they're asked to write something similar. You give them the steps of let's say, writing a process essay or something. And I mean, There are, right, in paragraph 2, you have to list at least 4 causes or 4 of the steps. So they list the 4 there, but we're not looking for those 4 things because we can even provide it to them. Sometimes in the prompts, we give it to them, right? So these are the 4 things you're going to put together. So again, the thing it's coming back to this thing that it shouldn't test the memory only. Even if they're able to say that these are the 4 steps, one sentence after the other, it won't fall under explaining. It's not writing the language of processing. So, so it's definitely going to be something beyond that.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully we got some value out of that activity. And I think the feedback, and again, I'm recording this and hope for newer teachers, you get the value of what we just did, because I know I have gone into international schools or schools in general around the world, and I would see assessments just like that given as a final exam. So an assessment like that is the final exam. It's the money exam. It may dictate whether the student pass or fail the course, and it just makes my skin crawl. It just makes my skin crawl. Were you saying something, Mr. Ahmed? Mr. Ahmed? Am I frozen?
Oh,
Check.
no, you're not. You're not.
All right, let's move into, you guys want to take a 5-minute break? We'll move into module 3.
Yeah, let's take a break.
All right, let's come. It's 11:25. Let's come back at 11:31. Get your coffee. We'll see you in 5 minutes.
Sorry, I was out for a minute. Are we still in the session right now?
Oh yeah, we're taking a 5-minute break.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry. Please take your time.
All right. Are we back?
So we are.
All right. Is everyone back? Mr. Maul, Dr. Musa?
Yes, we're back. Yes.
All right. Let's dive into um, formative, dive deeper into formative assessments. And we talked about a lot about this yesterday. And that's this idea that formative assessments are not just they are not just tests in themselves, they're tools. We mentioned this. And that summative assessments could be formative assessments. If we're looking at the data and we're doing something with the data, if we're looking at the results and it affects how we instruct, if it informs our instruction, then that summative assessment turns into a formative assessment. And anything from asking yes and no questions, um, quizzes, the length doesn't matter. The how we gain the data doesn't matter. We can observe and it be a formative. Our observations are a formative assessment, as long as we are recording them and then we're thinking about them when we turn those thoughts into data, actionable data that we can use to drive instruction. So again, I think this is an essential to how we view assessments, and not, as Dr. Sajjad said earlier, a paper and pen experience. Also, when we think about formative assessments, I think we often forget about what we're trying to really accomplish. And what we're really trying to accomplish is to understand the learner's ZPD, going back to Vygotsky, right? What can the learner be? What is the learner abilities at this moment, and what are the possibilities? What is that range of what they're capable of doing? And again, that requires a continuous assessment. And often we forget that. We should do our best to measure from an individual learner perspective, what are their individual abilities, current abilities, and how far can we move them up that learning process? Going back to Krashen's I+1. What's their range of capability? And what supports can we give them? That's the value of a formative assessment. And the other idea that I want to throw out there regarding formative assessments is that I think sometimes, and this especially happens at the university level, but it could happen in K-12 also, that we're not an island amongst ourselves. And I think, Mr. Ahmed, you hit on this yesterday and today when you talked about this idea of we need to be trained on assessments. We need to be more assessment literate. I think that's your term that you use, assessment literacy. And it reminds me of John Hattie's visible learning, And one of those factors that consistently are at the top of the most effective things that we can do as educators is collaboration. We collaborate with our peers, and we talk about and we're honest about what we can do to drive the learning forward. And so I was reading this assessment book last night to prepare for today. I found this statement very interesting. It said that if we create a culture, by the way, I put the Cultures of Thinking book inside of the Google Classroom. We get a chance to read that book. It's awesome. But I just want to emphasize the point that assessment is culture. It has to be a culture. And that if we can rely on one another to be honest about our practices, particularly how we assess from a formative perspective, and challenge one another, then this may not happen. I highlighted this last night. It says, team members' desire for empathy and understanding allowed mediocrity to go unchallenged. And I think so when we talk about assessment, we're also talking about collaboration, and that often we do a really good job in showing empathy to our colleagues. We do a very good job of that in helping and supporting our colleagues. I think sometimes where we fall flat is being honest with our colleagues about it's particularly around the use of assessments. What do we do with the assessment? Are we given assessments for the purposes of giving assessment? So I just wanted to throw out there that when we think about assessment, an essential aspect of assessment is collaboration. Getting with other people, especially people who do research and assessment, experienced educators, lead teachers, coordinators, and the team itself, to talk about assessment results. We used to do that at the university, Dr. Musa, Dr. Sajed. We stopped doing it. Remember, we would give an assessment and then we'd get everybody in the course in a room and we would talk about the results. There was some value in that. I don't know why we stopped doing that. We stopped about what? I think we was doing it before COVID, maybe a little bit after COVID. But we just stopped doing it. And I think that's a valuable and critical aspect of assessment, of formative assessments, or assessment as, let's call it all assessments as formative assessments. We treat all assessments, even the final exam from the previous semester, we treat as a formative assessment by looking at the results, collecting data from the results, and turning that data into some actual to action that informs our instruction. Dr. Musa?
I was going to say, I think what you touched on, especially about not using the assessments, has to do with, again, what you intimated was the culture of the organization. So if we're looking at organizational structure, typical top-down hierarchical organizational structures, the information only flows in one direction, and that's from the top to the bottom. So in order to implement, or to fully benefit from the data that we're receiving from, the assessments, whether, assessment of teaching, assessment for teaching, we would have to change the structure, or at least change the culture of the structure, where there could be like you pointed to it yesterday, that free flow of communication, where and put it into, again, a collaborative mix. But in a typical hierarchical structure, it's from top down, and then there's a lot of authoritative power. There's a lot of at times coercive power, my way or the highway. My way is best. So it doesn't really utilize the contributions of your instructors, your coordinators, and what have you. So in order for that insight to be utilized, the culture has to change. At least, in the very least, I would say the flow of communication, because this system that we're imagining or envisioning, I would say, is more of a holistic structure. You know, inputs, processing, and outputs in a holistic fashion. It's more of a horizontal organizational structure as opposed to a vertical organizational structure. So that was just one thought that popped into my mind.
Yeah. Anyone else want to contribute? I would like to. Can I respond to that? My response to that would be that when you have a big learning environment, a campus, that is essential that the learning environments or the learning cultures be breaking down to smaller bite-sized groups. That
Yep.
we should not, when we look at the university, we shouldn't look at it from a university perspective or even a college perspective or even a department perspective. We should look at it from a course perspective, a more bite-sized learning groups that will eliminate that hierarchical, as you said, vertical top-down interference. We call it top-down interference that gets in the way of teaching and learning. Dr. Sajjad, as the former dean of student affairs, what is your perspective on that? I mean, you sat in all the high-level executive meetings. You're even on the boards now. What is your perspective on that?
Well, thank you, Ray. I guess it's the communication again. It's first of all we need to understand the culture itself, and then I always remember the saying they said, if you don't like the singing, then join the choir. Yeah. So you take it from that perspective. You join them and see things from the different point of view. It's not always my point is the right point. I always try and sit on the other people seat and see what they are seeing from that particular angle, and based on that, you're trying to offer suggestion. But also, it's the way in which people are trying to communicate and offer their suggestion that what makes the difference. And I saw that from my own experience that change can it can happen, but it's the way in which you can galvanize these ideas and bringing them together and trying to see the intersection between different opinions. So the student would complain, teacher would complain, coordinator would complain, head of department would complain. So it's just sitting, bringing those dots together and trying to find a commonality between them and getting them to talk to each other. That's the hardest part. Sometime as a novice teacher, I would come with ideas that I learned from theories and stuff, but in reality, they don't function for one reason or another. So we're trying to solve all these knots that are there, and that will help us to improve evaluation in a way. And also, sometime as a teacher, I've noticed that even now in my current role as a teacher, I found that we I am very lazy to give feedback. I always say, "Oh, nobody's gonna listen," and we are very good at saying it rather than writing it and bringing evidence of how it works or how it's not working. So that's really important that we communicate in order to improve the assessment rather than just. I saw that we talk about it in individual or one to one basis, but we don't really communicate it. When we get at the end of the semester, sometime we get an email from the coordinator telling us about give us your feedback about the course. So everybody's saying, "Oh, it's perfect." So that's easier because I don't want to do the job, so it's just perfect. I say it's perfect. End of the story. if I said that it's not working, then I have to justify why it's not working, and I have to provide a solution, plausible solution. But nobody wants to do that when they are getting ready to go to enjoy their summer break or their break, whatever it is. So that's something we have the moral responsibilities toward our student, toward our institutions, toward ourselves as well, to have our opinion coming out there. One of the things that actually I like about the whole group that we have in today here is that we join such courses to have these discussion, to understand the different point of views, and to work toward improving our own practices. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Doc. You're right. That we often talk a good game, but when it's time to actually fill out that course feedback form, we ignore the email, we delete the email. Some of it is because we don't feel value, or some people may not feel value within the system. And that's why I said if we create smaller learning environments for smaller learning groups, even within bigger structures, people may feel more value within their smaller learning group. And it's important that in those learning groups don't focus much on being congenial versus being accountable, making sure that that when we see something that could be done better, that we, in a polite way, that we make suggestions for continuous improvement. Mr. Ahmed, did you?
Yeah, very interesting comments. Very honestly, I'm a student of change management. I have an MBA in education leadership in addition to all the teaching stuff and everything. So great discussion around the concept of the flow of information. Is it both ways, or it's always the hierarchical things? Most of those points. And Dr. Sajjad, basically the idea that and this is what I've seen. Even I've been involved in teacher training also. So soon after these trainings, a survey goes out to teachers asking their feedback about how things go. And the result is always everything is perfect. And, so the fact is, it doesn't happen in vacuum. We need to understand the reason behind all this thing. Organizational culture plays a huge role in here. And the role is that, when the change management is only someone's wish, it's not a need, it's not triggered by the needs. There's a basis for it. Then what happens is, all of those changes which happen is someone's nightmare. Someone wants or had a bad dream or something, and all of a sudden they decide we want things done this way, and there is no data which feeds into that decision. So as a result, over a period of time, the employees come to know that whatever they say, the opinion doesn't matter. So why to bother with going into the why to say that things need improvement, and why to say that this is one thing and that can be improved this way? That definitely needs time. So people don't even bother to say that thing. So what they do is, right, go ahead and say everything is perfect. Someone is happy up there.
Yeah, and as you said, it's a cultural thing, and it's also I also call it because I'll call it the boy who cried wolf from a managerial perspective. So the managers, the administrators, throughout the culture, they create this separation where they don't really value the feedback, but then when they actually value the feedback and want the feedback, nobody wants to give the feedback because they believe the feedback won't be valued. And then the management says, well, you guys are not filling out the form. We really want the feedback, but your actions don't show that you want the feedback. So it's this communication, or miscommunication loop where, I want the feedback sometimes, but I don't want the feedback all the time, and from an administrative standpoint, there are times where you need to move forward and do things, but it's a communication issue. That we used to say open door policy, right? I have an open door policy. I think we moved away from that, right?
Well,
Because of having an open door policy is time consuming.
you see,
It's time.
you see the problem, Ray. The real challenge is that you have teachers coming to your office and as a coordinator or even as a higher management, telling you about this and that, and it's like put it in writing. They never do, because as a management, you cannot just say, "Oh, I heard teachers saying that." They'd be like, "Give us the statistic." Is only Ray he's coming always to your office, or is it only Musa, or is it only Amal that's coming to your office? Give us a statistic. How many of them? You have 20 teachers. How many of them are willing to change or want to change? What are the changes they proposing? Where is the statistic? We don't have the statistic. The statistic are in that email that everybody is ignoring. So,
Right.
as a
But then
management, you can
no one wants to do the email because they don't want to put themselves out there, right? Because
exactly.
there may be some backlash for putting yourself out there, especially if your name is attached to it.
You
So
don't have.
it's a culture issue.
It is.
If we change the culture, then people will be more. There'll be more. They'll have the capacity to take risk, right? People don't
Exactly.
want to take risks.
And because of that reason, actually, when I was talking to Professor Barnawi, is the president of the association of the assessment, that's the first reason he said that we need to change the assessment culture around the Gulf and the MENA region. And the only way to do it is just do it informally, outside, away from the institutions. So if you have some organization that can do that, and we start having these kind of discussion, me, you, Ahmad, Amal, we are from different organization and maybe represent different geographical areas as well around the Middle East, that will help at some point to drag people from different kind of level of management and different kind of the different level of the hierarchy to talk together and understand what's going on, and maybe we can affect changes. It's going to take a while, but I'm sure that in 5 years from now we'll be talking about different kind of assessment culture and assessment literacy.
I like assessment
Yeah,
literacy. I'm
that's
gonna start using that.
yeah, it's a grassroots movement that you're talking about, Dr. Sally. Uh, yeah, so also I think we I like focusing in on the power dynamic. So the traditional hierarchical structures, the power dynamic is also concentrated at the top, and people in the lower rungs of the hierarchy, like we've all hit on this, and we've all mentioned comments about this. They don't feel the agency or the ability to voice their opinions. Maybe it's a value issue, but also the punitive nature of sometimes the punitive nature of hierarchical structures is it hinders people from making their contribution because fear, they have that fear of punishment or losing their job or a number of issues that can come up. So I think grassroots movements, because I even take that issue with this type of approach with myself. Well, I can affect my classroom in the best way possible. I can make sure that my communication is flowing with my students and people in my section. I can make sure that we respect other people's opinions and values, that I respect their opinions and values, the opinions and value of my students, and I give opportunities. Because one thing I've noticed, especially in our context here in Saudi Arabia, with the um, movements such as Saudiization and the need to put Saudis in the front, that sometimes maybe from a human resources standpoint, a lot of teachers with value, a lot of teachers with knowledge and experience are being underutilized. So, that is an issue that I think that contributes to the present situation. And and I understand it. It's from a managerial standpoint, it's very difficult because you have to put your people to work. But I would also posit that in an organization like a university, uh, the culture has to be where everybody can can contribute and feel valued. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Mr. Ahmed, Mr. Ahmed.
Yeah, thank you. Starting with the points Dr. Sujat just raised, um, basically, I attended the GALTA session on CFR. That was probably 2 days ago or something, and probably Dr. Sujat was there too. So the point is, look, when the change that happens in organizations, when it happens as an administrative decision, and then probably it is always hierarchical, it is always top down, and it happens that way. And probably we should not only be pointing that thing out, and it's important to do that, but at the same time, there is always a need for professionalizing all these activities, assessment, for example, or let's say any other academic activities that we are doing. And there's a lack of that thing. And GALTA, I mean, it's a great initiative. So these organizations have a huge role to play in bringing about the positive academic change in the society and in the overall culture and in specific organizational cultures. So let's say the assessment thing. I mean, we have basically we're talking about that. So the overall thing, if you just go into any universities, more or less the same practices are happening everywhere. And I mean, so more or less the same format is used, and more or less the same way it is administered, and more or less the same weaknesses and strengths we are talking about. And the reason is because there is no anchoring point out there. There is nothing to anchor to. So we do have good examples elsewhere which don't fit into our context. For example, there are many organizational bodies out there in many other countries, and we are all praised for them. But the thing is, many of those things don't fit into our culture, in our way of doing. So, and there's always a need, again, I would say, for these organizations to play the role of leadership. And that leadership is probably lacking. So I'm not talking about the hierarchical position-based leadership. It's the leadership, the professional leadership. And that should actually steer the the way forward in these things. And assessment probably is one of those, because unfortunately they don't have professional examination boards or something which come into some quality assurance stuff in universities or within universities. Most of it is given to the individual units and all that who are doing it. But I mean, so there's probably a need for kind of some accreditation, and there are some, and they need to be more active, making sure that these things are happening in a more academic, more professional way.
Absolutely. And again, I would offer, the small learning groups is where those grassroots, and I consider this possibility that we're doing right now as a small learning group, right? That, but in a work in a university or school setting, that we make sure that we teaching in teams, we teaching collaboratively, and that we take a mindset of being accountable and not just congenial. In how we, not just saying everything is fine, you did a wonderful job, but in a polite way, in a congenial way, we we challenge our folk, everyone on the team, to be accountable. And so when we talk about the feedback loop, assessing, analyzing, responding, and reassessing, we see how this not only permeates in the classroom, but it can also permeate in our department, in our colleges, and in the overall university, right? Because in essence, what you're asking, Musa, and I think what we're saying is you're asking management to go through the feedback loop. The same things that we should be doing in our classroom, we're asking of management. So do we see the power of assessment, right? So one way to address this is to create that culture in not just classrooms, throughout the whole organization of assess, analyze, respond, and then reassess. Because what we're asking of management, of administrators, is to let us as educators benefit from your formative assessments. And if you are doing those formative assessments as a cultural act, then we may be willing to lay down our shield and be vulnerable to the processes that you want to apply upon us. So I see this as an opportunity. So and this is from an ID. I mean, Musa and our ID guys, and this is how you find the gap, right? You find the gap through that front end analysis, right? Which is an assessment, that gap analysis. All right. Am I going the wrong way? Dylan Williams' 5 key strategies. Dylan Williams, who is arguably the world's most influential assessment researcher, synthesizes formative assessments into 5 strategies. Let's walk through them briefly. Strategy 1: students need to know what they are trying to achieve and what success looks like. I've said this ever since I've been an administrator, school leader, that the students need to know what the destination is. They need, when you introduce a new unit, they need to know what success looks like in that unit, what they're required to know, and how this will help them solve a immediate or long-term problem. If you don't do that, then that's just essential. If you don't do that, you're going to lose a lot of folks, right? People need to know what success looks like. All right, just like we need to know what the overall outcomes of the course are. Students need to know how they can be successful in this course, right? And reading, telling them to read the chapter or read the book or read their syllabus is just not enough. It's just not enough. They need to know the skills they need, and more importantly, because if I can say this for a second, we all have to remember that we all have the same brains, right? And in those brains, there's a reticular activating system that makes us fearful about certain things, about certain information, data inputs. Imagine being, it's just like being called to the dean's office. That reticular activating system is going to be on guard. It's the same thing with those new students that first year, those new students first newly to the university. They don't know what's going on, and then you have an instructor that tells them just to read the syllabus or the block book, and not walking them through what success looks like. We have to spend time in doing that, and I would offer you we need to put a lot of value on success criteria, and not just getting good grades. I think we focus on getting good grades. I think we use at our university, Musa and Dr. Sajjad, we use as a leverage getting into the medical program. But the reality is every student doesn't want to get into the medical program. So we use that as, if you want to get, the medical program. But the reality is some students want to be dentists. Some want to be radiologists. Some want to be hospital administrators. So, that's a major flaw. We need to define what success is, and we need to define what success is in every individual student so we can properly assess them. And that's the value of the learner profile. And again, I know I'm selling learner profile throughout this course. This course is really not about learner profile, but I think it's essential to the assessment. Which side note, I was thinking about this yesterday, and I'll pose this as a question. Should assessments be designed based on student interest or pathways? So meaning, if in our context, Dr. Musa, Dr. Sajjad, if a student doesn't want to be in the medical program, should there be a different assessment for them versus students who want to be in the medical program? I'll give you the context of why I say that. I remember when I was in undergrad, I had to take chemistry, right? And I had to take econ, and I had to take math. And they would give us the same chemistry course as the biology majors and the science majors. And I'm like, look, guys, I'm a humanities, I'm an English lit major. Why are you assessing me at the same level as the folks in this chemistry course as the folks who want to actually get a chemistry degree? Does that make sense, or is that off base? Should we design assessments based on what a student's pathway or what the student's expectation is of themselves? I'm just throwing that out there as a question. Yes, Mr. Ahmed.
So let's go back to what we started with. So in the beginning, yesterday, the first 5 or 10 minutes.
I know what you're going to say.
Exactly. So that's my answer. That's my answer.
Yeah.
So the thing is, because assessment doesn't happen in vacuum. So if all the students, the course description, the course objectives apply to a group of students, and that's what we test. Right?
Can I retort?
Yeah, go ahead.
For a second?
Yeah.
So does that mean we should have different courses based on a student's pathway? So that chemistry course, should we have a chemistry course for humanities majors?
Okay, I mean, so that's actually the point is, again, I mean, so to say that if the course description and the course objectives remain the same, and they're not specialized courses. For example, language teaching is basically, if you just go too deeply into that, there is a language course for, let's say, business students. It's a separate thing. And then there's a language course for medical students. There's one for engineering students, and there's one for others. I mean, so maybe we can come back to redesign these things. Because one of the approaches to design courses for the specialization, purposes in English, is to it should incorporate the content they are going to study in their courses. Because in the preparatory programs, most of the time what we're doing is we are enabling the students to be able to do their assignments when they go into their specializations, right? So if the courses that we are teaching does not use the content that they're going to study in the future, then most of the time the canvas and the scope of the vocabulary and the content, they are basically the schema that we should build around them. Because let's say these students are going to read a medical text, and there's another group of students who are going to read a text about dentistry, right? So the thing would be, have we built enough schemata around these things? And because that's what is going to help us in our classrooms too. Because if a student coming from engineering background reads a text in, let's say, about a medical context, most of the time he will not be able to, I mean, even if his language level is at a certain level, he might not understand things because the schema thing keeps him back there, right? So he's not able to do those things. So I would say, again, the thing goes back to the whole thing. Are we, because we are testing what we are teaching them in a sense, right? Although the concept seems a little odd, but that's what happens. So we cannot test, like, we cannot test a level 2 student using the content, or let's say, a test bank used for A1 students. So in the same way, the opposite is also not possible. So probably that is also true for these specializations, if they are doing specific courses.
But we could do it if we did adaptive testing.
I mean, yeah, I mean, that's possible. It's always possible. You can do that adaptation. But then again, based on what you said in the beginning of the day today, that you are going into a lot of need assessment and need analysis, and then has to be reflected in the courses that you're offering. The course content should include that thing. And in that way, yes, it is possible.
So the only reason I'm putting I'm just playing devil's advocate in that I want to make sure I'm injecting the idea of equity and thinking about student-centered learning. Dr. Sajjad, that's all I'm doing.
Yeah.
Just playing devil's advocate.
No, I can see your point of view, Rainer. I'm reflecting on what we had in the college. You see, sometime I would sit with the teachers from the English language department, and they'll be like, oh, the student should learn this, should learn that, should do this, should be able to do that. But the thing is, they're thinking about the current situation, but they don't see, or they don't foresee the target situation. So everybody, like, I remember sitting in a course for the pharma technologist, and everybody saying they should be able to write a paragraph, they should be able to write an essay, they should be able to do write references of this and that. But the simple reality, if they just bothered and worked into a pharmacy in the hospital and say what the pharma technologists are doing, are expected to do, or they're doing at the current situation, they would understand that they don't need none of that. But because we perceive the need from what we have in us as a language teacher, say, oh, they need to learn these vocabulary, they need to be able to read this kind of text, they need to do all these things. Yes, correct. But do not ignore the situation. As exactly Rainer was saying earlier, a humanities student is studying chemistry. So the same thing I would say, technical, the medical technical or whatever pharma technologist is studying English. So you have to understand what exactly they need the language for. So when you go to their places there, they don't need actually English. I went to the hospital and I sat there and I asked the pharmacist, and I said, well, so what do the pharma technologists are doing? They said, well, they just do a few codes and they understand the code that they come from here and there and this. And I said, how much English do they need? They said, none. Actually, you don't need English, you need math. I was like, okay, thank you. So what they need is just simple English for communication. That's all they need. They don't need to read long text. They don't need the all these things that we perceive. They're not correct. So the same thing I would say for many of the courses, as Ahmed said also, if you want to build something, you have to see the whole spectrum. So this is something that maybe I would argue that lots of us, many of the English instructors in the preparatory program, we don't see the program that the student are going to join. We always say, oh, if you want to be an engineer, you have to learn this and that. But they're not going to become an engineer tomorrow. They're going to take 5-6 years more doing the engineering discourse, engineering jargon, and then they're going to become an engineer. So all our job is to help them to read, to be able to read these books that we can see in front of us in the library, to be able to scan through them, to be able to have a discussion about them. That's the kind of things, maybe I would argue, that's the kind of things that they need. So understanding the target situation and the process through which they're going to get to the target situation will make our job easier
We're trying to be the God that can give everybody everything, but our job is to hand them to the next step comfortably. That's our job, I think. And based on that, we design our assessment.
Absolutely. Authentic problems that they have, immediate problems that they have, or they may have in the future. I think Dr. Musa, you had your hand raised.
I just want to reiterate and agree with you guys exactly. So, since we're looking at the assessment, we have to look at the program holistically. Like, for example, like Dr. Sajad stated, that we have our students writing essays. But, mostly what doctors write, and I went and I asked the doctors in the hospital, what do they write? And one of the things, and I've suggested this, one of the things that they do write a lot is patient histories. And I went and looked online. I have several examples of a patient history. And, there's a specific format, and it goes very in depth. And they use research in describing the patient's history because, they use referencing to apply it to the patient, to support their decision-making process based on the total picture or historical picture of the patient's situation, how they diagnose. And this is a very in-depth document that most doctors, all doctors really, especially treating patients, they all have to write these things. And our students, we haven't used this type of thing. So that goes to looking at the outcome. What is a doctor going to do? And then backwards design, putting in the proper assessments that are aligned to what the end goal, what they're going to have to produce, right? So a lot of times, and there is such a thing as general education. Of course, we want our students to be generally educated, because what we also find is that a lot of times our students don't have a lot of background information. A lot of times we make reference points that go over their head, or they just don't have any information about it. But I think, it should be, our classes should be engineered because, from an ID standpoint, we always want to relate the information to the job transfer, because in the end, Robert Gagnon said transfer, the last step was to enhance the retention, but also transfer it to the job. So we have to make what we're doing and what they're learning transferable, right? And not just floating out there like having a pharmacy tech write 5 paragraph essays and he'll never ever use it, right? Or even learn English when he's in a second language situation where most of his customers are going to be, the native language at the L1. And so, that's the overall picture of alignment, I think. And, so there has to be transfer, and there has to be aligned with what they're actually going to do. Yeah.
Mr. Ahmed?
Yeah, okay, thank you. So, we are basically into a different domain again. So this is mainly to do with the course management, curriculum development, and definitely it has a huge link to assessment. Now, so what we do normally, the English language courses in the preparatory program, is there is the same course offered to, let's say, the science group of students generally receive the same course. And in the end, they are assessed in the same way. More or less the same questions are there for engineering students, and they are doing it. So this is the normal thing. Now, ideally, we need to think about those things up there. So there are groups of students who just need the literacy of English. They need to be able to say that this letter is an A and that letter is B. So just being able to read and write in English. And that is probably their requirement, and they should be assessed accordingly. So, and this is basically the literacy level. So we need to start probably or somehow embed literacy into our language program. So literacy is one thing that we should do. And the next level which naturally is a bit of communication in the target language. So the communicative purpose, for example, and there are so many models out there. There is one, the Calgary Cambridge Guide for the English language courses, for example, taught in a medical context, right? So if you're teaching your medical students, that is one of the guides. I mean, so what doctors actually do. So it's a huge framework, and it identifies all those different actions that happen in the context of a hospital. So what do the doctors do? How do they take the patient's history, and how they talk to the patient, how they greet patient? So all of those different speech acts are somehow introduced into their specializations. So going back again, so there's the literacy that needs to be addressed in the preparatory language programs. That's the first step. And then a bit of general communication skill that should be going into that. And thirdly, the most important thing, if it is for special group of students, let's say medical students, engineering students, their field or content relevant vocabulary and content relevant, let's say, academic activities that should be embedded into the course. For example, by academic activities, I mean, if they are expected to write longer essays once they get into their specialization, because look, our purpose is not only to prepare them finally for the university, we are preparing them to pass the college, which is coming soon after the preparatory year, right? So for that, there is always a requirement that what those colleges require from these students. If it's an English medium school, so they always say, right, so you're going to write assignments. So are we preparing for them? And then again, yet more element which is lacking in our language courses is the academic writing or academic components to everything in there. For example, citation is one thing that we never train our students on, and in the colleges they always need it, right? So they're expected to be able to cite the things that they're reading. And then again, we're talking about Bloom's taxonomy, for example, and synthesis is one thing. And that, I mean, so you cannot think about synthesizing without referencing it, right? So that's these are a few things that need to be. I mean, so that's why I say, and that's what I said in the beginning, that going back to the whole thing, probably it's a big question related to curriculum development.
So I hate to be that guy, but again, if we know who's in the classroom and we're building a learner profile, then we're able to adjust appropriately. Because the simple fact of it is, whether we're a medical school, right? We're preparing medical professionals, but a large percentage of those young people that we have in our classrooms will not be in the medical profession. So what responsibility do we have towards those people who decide, you know what, in a year from now, 6 months from now, 2 years from now, that they want to be engineers, that they want to be financiers, that they want to go into agriculture? What responsibility do we have to them? And a big part of assessment is that learning profile, and that we need to consider. Dr. Sajjad, you want to say something?
Yeah. Maybe I disagree a little bit with Ahmed. Maybe I misunderstood him as well. Normally, what we have in our mind, and that's what I've noticed, is that when we say medical student, immediately we jump into the idea that, as Rainer said, they're going to become physicians. But in our property program, from property program to be a physician, there is about 6 years. During these 6 years, the immediate one, the next year after they finish the property program, they're going to study biochemistry, chemistry, physics, principle of diseases, all these courses. So my target is not for them to be able to use the communication in the hospital, because that's a far-fetched goal. But my target is to be able to communicate in a biochemistry course, to be able to write report in biochemistry course, to be able to address the assignment need, to be able to read the biochemistry references, to be able to read the other books that they come in next year, to be able to communicate in a hospital. That's a far-fetched goal, and it's not my job to prepare them for that. My job is to prepare them for the next phase, to hand them successfully to next phase, and the next phase will hand them successfully to the phase after. I'm not the one who is going to prepare them to be able to communicate successfully in the hospital. I'm going to give them the tool to communicate successfully in biochemistry course next door. That's my immediate goal. And that's one thing that I've noticed, that we always trying to feel bad, or to feel bad about ourselves, that we're not able to prepare a student to communicate in a hospital. That's far. Or to be able to communicate in a factory for engineering a student. But remember, we always need to remember that that's really the ultimate goal, and we maybe play about 2 to 10% on that preparation, but our preparation is for BISTAT, for a statistical course that coming next. These are the kind of things that we need to keep our head in and focus. And based on that, we design our courses and also evaluate accordingly. Thank you.
Right. That's the key, the evaluation, that feedback loop, the evaluation. And so what I want to emphasize here is the value of assessment. Assessment is not just transactions that happen inside the classroom. The assessments create culture. So if we create the culture of sitting going back to that small learning group, that small collaborative group, we sit back, and instead of just asking, what can we do better in the course, is look and making sure that the course meets the wants, needs, and expectations of our learners, whether those wants, needs, and expectations be short term, midterm, or long term. And until we answer that question, it's always and put that and make that a part of the culture, make that a part of the process, we're going to always misinterpret what this is about, right? Because you're going to have a lot of people who come into the university as a new employee, new faculty members, actually thinking that they're preparing them to do surgery next year. And as Dr. Sajjad said, that's 6, 7, 8, 9 years away. So but until we maintain that culture of assessment, until we have that culture of assessment, then when we go and look at the course outcomes, the course outcomes, we can be more realistic in how we evaluate the program and how we execute the course. Mr. Ahmed?
Yeah, that's naturally, I had to clarify a few things. Probably, actually, there's no disagreement with what Dr. Sajjad said. Yeah, that's exactly the case. So let me clarify it. So I pointed out 3 things. Number 1 is literacy, which is the basic, being able to read and write. This is the need of some groups of students in the university or in any of these preparatory year programs. And the second group of students, let's say, let's put them into specialization groups. So these groups of students need, mainly, we need to prepare them for their respective colleges. And when we say that, we need to prepare them according to the content that they're going to study in their respective colleges. And I just repeat that thing. So that's the second thing. But when I was giving reference to the Calgary Cambridge Guide, this is, again, the next level. And this is, so we cannot timeline it within the same, probably, preparatory year program framework. It might not help in there. But if you ever have to teach the medical students to survive in a medical context, this particular reference is a useful thing that to adopt to teach these medical students. And probably this is more of a communicative purpose, and it can be included in let's say, or maybe it might not be needed at all, because by the time the students graduate from the university, they have been through so much of English content that they just survive in any context. But when it is needed, that can provide a good reference point there.
If you allow me, please. I saw a model in the University of Taif, what they call it graduate attribute. So what they did is they gave specific courses in the preparatory years, and then again in the 6th, 5th years, they also offer different courses, work at what they call it, English for work, English for engineering, English. So these courses were given to the student when in the fourth years. So after they've gone through the journey, and now they understood the need for this particular language. So there, exactly what you're saying, Ahmed, is there is a place, but we need to and then as from management point of view, they tell you, oh, we did our part, we prepared them, and we call preparatory program. We're not called follow-up programs. You see?
Yeah, exactly. So I have never given them any consultation, so they're doing it on their own. Right? So yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would be a big supporter of that thing if that happens.
So, believe it or not, this conversation that we had for the last 20 minutes really talks about this slide, right? And that's why I posed the question about the assessment. In that, number one, we need to know what success looks like from not just the micro level, from a macro level. We need to know what success looks like, and it needs to be from different perspectives. Number two, we need to, one of the things that we said, which is point two, is that however, it's garbage in, garbage out, right? If we're not getting the right data, right, we're not going to be able to engineer an effective program. And we're not going to be able to continuously improve an effective program, right? So we can have teachers, educators, lecturers, professors teaching the same course for 10 years, and that course does not grow or move or develop because we're not asking the right questions, we're not giving the right activities, and we're not having the right discussions. Number three, feedback. We got to understand that at the end of the day, even if we ask the right questions, if we're not providing the proper feedback, we're not moving forward, right? And that feedback is not, especially if that feedback is not linked to success, especially if that feedback is not specific, right? And think about the feedback that you give during a drafting process with a student. Is that feedback actually helping the student write a better draft, or does that feedback just cause more confusion and anxiety with the student, right? So we need to make sure that not only that we provide feedback, but the feedback is effective, that is efficient, and that it reduces anxiety. And going back to crashing, it reduces that effective filter, not increases it. Same thing with the small learning community, that when we give feedback, that the feedback is not going to be feedback that makes the teachers resistant or makes the teachers have anxiety, but that feedback allows the teachers, the educators, the people in the team to move their teaching forward, right? It's a cultural issue, right? 4 and 5 is really about metacognition, right? And again, we can look at this from a micro or macro perspective. Ultimately, are we providing the resources and the opportunities and possibilities to allow the students to operate on their own, regardless if they become medical students, engineers, farmers, whatever the case may be? Because that's the other responsibility that we have, right? From a human perspective, that regardless of what you do, that the information I'm giving you, you can transfer. Somebody said transfer. I think it was Dr. Musa, that you can transfer these skills into another aspect of your life if you choose to make a change, regardless of how dramatic that change is. I think that's very important, because I think one of the things I'm fearful in the conversation that we're having is that we're kind of putting blinders on a little bit. And I agree, and I'll be the first one. I know you're gonna hold my feet to the fire where I said several times, you got to look at the course outcomes. I absolutely agree. But what I would also offer is that the mindset and the culture of assessment allows us to change those course outcomes. And that's the power of assessment, to make sure that every student who takes that course will gain some value from that course, and that they're not just wasting that time or taking that course for the sake of gaining the credit, right, to proceed on to the next level. That there should be more to it than just gaining the credit or checking off that I've taken this course and I passed it. Does that make any sense? That when I talk about equity and assessments, that's what I'm speaking on. Anyone disagree with that, or am I being too much of a social constructivist here?
No,
Too idealistic.
It makes a lot of sense, and because ultimately we're going to have to leverage the value aspect of the course, because from an ID standpoint, that's what's in it for me, right? And why should I care? We use those acronyms a lot. So what's in it for the student then? So to be truly student centered, we're going to have to dial in on that value, and that would require differentiated learning. So I would posit that now we're in an age of where we can use AI, especially if used properly. We can use AI to help us increase leverage to where we're able to differentiate the learning based on the learner profile and what that learner needs. And we can use AI to help us shore up and to increase that value by giving them specific differentiated instruction and showing them how to leverage AI to increase their agency and specification for their needs.
Right. And also keeping in mind the different modalities, right? Because when we talk about feedback and the feedback loop and the importance of feedback, that if we're stuck on one modality of assessment or a limited modality of assessment, then the feedback cannot be varied, and it can't be differentiated, right? It cannot be personalized. Again, if the midterm is MCQs, how much feedback can we give on the MCQ, right? And so again, administratively, MCQs may be easier to execute and streamline the process. But again, on the MCQ, there's very little feedback I can give and do with my students that's going to be meaningful, that will help them successfully continue on with the course. So when we talk about feedback is what makes a formative assessment formative, right? So if in fact we believe that formative assessments have value, then we need to make sure that we really are serious and earnest about the modalities we use when we assess. Let's see. All right. I mean, we already know this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. The value of summative assessment, I'm going to say this. The value for summative assessments is not really for us. I don't think it's summative assessments unless we use it as for formative purposes. We take the data and we create actions based on the data from the summative assessments. But I don't think the summative assessments are really for us, outside of using it for formative reasons. It's for the life, that chaos in life, move on to the next step, getting the credential, meeting the qualification, being ranked ordered. I really, outside of I think the only time that we use summative assessments meaningfully is when we turn that summative assessment into a formative opportunity. Dr. Sajjad?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say, is that it's recycling things at the end of the semester or the end of the year when the student graduated and they move to the next school from high school to university or whatever. That assessment is meaningless for them, but it's meaningful for us in the institution itself because we take whatever we found in that summative assessment to inform the next cohort development. So maybe it's not for the student themselves. They're not going to benefit from it at the end when they finish and they move on. But it's for me to kind of go back and recycle and re-improve things that I was doing before. So again, as you said, it's the purpose that determine how we use summative assessment to inform our practices.
The other point that I want to note here is that because we've been talking a lot about culture, is that and this probably from a K-12, but even from a secondary perspective, post-secondary perspective, that we have to, is our responsibility as educators to not put as much value on a summative assessment, because many parents, especially as a result of the parents, learners, their money is the summative assessment. Everything is about the test. How well, the student, the parent will say, did you do well on the test? Let me prepare you for the test. I need to get you a tutor for the test. You got to take, you got the midterm coming up. You got a final exam. He can't go here. I'm the scoutmaster for PAC, for Scouting America. And a lot of times I hear, well, they can't attend this activity because they have a big midterm coming up. So, well, he's only in the second grade. He got a midterm. Yeah, he got a midterm coming up, this test. So everyone is on edge about the test, about these summative assessments. And so I think also, as we talk about assessments and the fundamental nature of assessments, we have to make sure that we don't overvalue them also, and that we communicate to learners and stakeholders that they ought not be overvalued. Because I think, because our silence, I think we know this, but we don't really communicate this to learners, that you are more than that summative assessment. That's just a part of the process. It's not the entire process. Anyone have anything on that? Ultimately, we talk about data-driven decisions, right? And that when we're informed educators, we're making data-driven decisions. And so, again, garbage in, garbage out. We have to make sure that we're writing valid and reliable assessments, so we're getting good data that we can turn into action. Excuse me. Excuse me. In order to do that, we might want to ask ourselves some questions about these assessments. After assessment has been taken, number one, what's the percentage of students who will demonstrate mastery of each outcome? Which outcomes had the highest and lowest success rates? Were there differences by instructional format, section, or time? These are things that we should be thinking about after the fact. Item level questions. Which items had the highest error rates? What do the wrong answers tell us about misconceptions? Were any items unexpectedly hard or easy? Why? And I know sometimes in the assessment group, Dr. Sajjad, you can confirm this. If a certain amount of students get the answers wrong, we take that question, we delete that question. Am I wrong on that? Is that our practice?
We not necessarily delete the question. We delete the question after, because if you have a high a student getting the question wrong, that means either there must be a problem with the question. Either this question has not been explained in the objective of the course, or the other thing also, there might be a mistake in the way in which the question was worded. So if you look at it carefully, you always find a problem. But sometimes there isn't one. So if there isn't an issue, so that's why we return it back to the specialist, where the course coordinators between, you know, that in our university we teach in 3 campuses, and so the coordinators in the 3 campuses, Riyadh, Jeddah, and Al-Ahsa, they need to deliberate the question, discuss it between them, and if there is no issue and it was taught, we keep it. But most of the time there'll be wording issues, or the question has not been taught equally in everywhere. So in that case, then you make a decision.
So that goes back to the conversation we had earlier. Why isn't that discussion brought down to the teacher level?
Yeah. So you ask the coordinator.
I've never had a coordinator ask me about a certain question and why they thought, you know, never said, well, Ray, 90% of your students got question 10 wrong. You know, he never said, you know, why do you think that is? Did you guys cover that? I've never got that type of questioning from a coordinator.
Yeah, exactly. So the coordinators, they will look at it from the course book point of view, and you see it is part of the objective. It is part of the objective, assumingly that everybody has taught that. And so, therefore,
so I'm sorry, go ahead, Doc.
Yeah, and therefore they might not delete the question. If it was there in the course book, then the assumption that this has been taught and therefore cannot be deleted. And there is also no wording issues. So sometimes you hear that there is, so the way the question was written is not correct, is not clear, it's confusing. So in that case, if it's a confusion and there is a high rate of the student that they didn't get it right, then you delete the question.
So, but the bigger point, go ahead,
But you're saying that they don't consult with the teachers.
Yeah, so
it's hard to do that when you have 70 teachers on the male side, and then you have another 60 in the female, and then 14 Jeddah, 14 Al-Ahsa. So to consult, you need representation.
I would offer that would be essential and critical, because it becomes an equity issue, because you may find out that X amount of students or teachers didn't cover that particular, for whatever reason. So, and I just want to point the point of this communication and collab, because we talked about culture and creating these collaborative teams, collaborative small learning groups, small teams that you can get more efficient data from, if we in fact are asking these questions post assessments. Mr. Ahmed, you was going to say something?
Yeah, you know, most of this discussion is more relevant to organizational, maybe management side of the organizations, and there has to be some sort of ironclad mechanisms that make it mandatory that most of these things somehow do get addressed, because I mean, and there's a need probably for improving all those things. I mean, I've been to a couple of organizations, and more or less, without exception, these things do exist. With systems, sometimes I just went to talk to one of the assessment coordinator or a unit head. I mean, they wanted to change things, but there was this interesting observation that said, okay, you know, the change doesn't happen until something is found broken, and a more professional attitude to making these changes, to make them better. There's always a need for that, because let's say the teacher will never come to know which particular question, for example, in a final summative exam was getting consistently wrong answers from the students, because that is never made available to the teachers at the bottom end in hierarchical leadership structure. So there is definitely, this information is not for the teacher's consumption, and this has to be conveyed, or in this discussion, more of the assessment coordinators or assessment professionals can benefit from it, or otherwise generally in organization itself. That these are very important. And then again, it's bringing us back to this thing, and I just said a few minutes ago that we need to professionalize assessment, and this assessment, professionalizing it does not have to. It doesn't have to come from someone on the top. There can be multi-directional influences on organizations, and one of those forces, which can be a very positive influence and a professional leadership, is GALTA. Again, I'm a fan of organizations like this. They can play a huge role in bringing about these changes in academic culture in individual organizations. So I mean, but for that, they will have to go beyond probably this sort of shelved discussion. But although that they are important, and I understand they are important, it's somehow trickling down to us, probably at the bottom end. But there is always a need for doing a little more, defining the best practices, and taking these things to organizations. Because if you're not doing it, then probably it will be just an exercise in for no good reason, because the impact will finally remain there. So to make them more impactful, GALTA sort of organizations should go beyond certain level to make themselves felt across different organizations.
I agree. And going back to the coordinator issue, right? You got to remember, I would venture to bet that I will wager that no one in the coordinator staff are qualified, certified, educated assessors, where they went to school for assessment. Maybe someone is, but I'll put a paycheck up that says most of those coordinators they didn't go to school for assessment, and they shouldn't be making those decisions. Dr. Sajjad?
Yeah, I agree, and I agree to what Ahmed was saying earlier. You see, when you come to assessment, it's a whole organizational culture. So you see, when we have the summative result and the reports, and with all these items, ups and down, high percentage of student answering this and all this information, normally it goes to coordinators. Coordinators, even like within the midterms or even the quizzes, the formative ones, they are expected to conduct a bi-weekly meetings with their teams. The coordinator's response is that we call for this meeting, but most of the people, the instructors, are busy and they don't attend to this meeting, only few. So we had to send things through emails. Nobody reads them. So you go through all these loops all over and again. But again, if you want to change, then as Ahmed said, it's a cultural change. So everybody, if they hold their part of their responsibilities and deliver on that, so the communication will become flawless. So as a coordinator or as an instructor, if somebody send me the psychometric result of the midterm, let's say, exams, and I looked at it and I'd be like, okay, so most of the students are getting this wrong, this right, okay, so thank you. And I wouldn't even bother. But when we sat as a coordinator with my team, and I say, guys, look, this question, actually, most of the students are getting it wrong. Why do you think that is? So people will provide feedback on the exam itself, on the assessment itself, and they start discussing ways in which we could improve things. But that never happens. So you feel the burden on the coordinator. And that's why many people, they say, I don't want to coordinate anymore, because most of the burden comes to them to justify why these things are happening, because they feel that their teams are not cooperating with them, and that they end up doing the assessment work, get blamed for it, and and not compensated for the time they put for. So it is institutional issues. I don't know if that happens also in the school or not, but I would assume yes, because there is a head of science, head of math, head of English. So the same thing I think is happening everywhere, but it is the degree of communication between the team itself.
All right, I think this is a good point for us to stop for today. Mr. Mall, are you
Yes.
still with us?
Yeah.
I feel really bad because I feel like we're hogging the conversation. We're not giving you an opportunity to speak.
Is Amal from higher education or she's from schools?
No, I work in the Institute of Princess Noura University. It's for teaching English for other faculties.
Yeah, I see.
We unfortunately dominated and we never gave her a chance.
No, it's totally fine. It's totally fine. I'm learning a lot. I'm enjoying listening to all of you. It's interesting.
So tomorrow is our last module. We'll finish this up. We'll look at item analysis, and we'll go through some actual another activity with some items on an exam. But we'll look at distractors and talk about what wrong answers tell us. I think that's a very interesting conversation to talk about what wrong answers tell us about what students are thinking and about our assessments. Any questions, any concerns, criticism for today? All right.
No,
well,
thank you.
Thank you for your time. Again, another very stimulating conversation. I learned some things today, and I look forward to tomorrow. So we'll see you guys tomorrow at 10 o'clock.
Inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.